Bryce Edwards joins us on the program. Bryce, kia ora, welcome.
Morena, Andrew.
This has been a bit of an underwhelming announcement of reform from the government, honestly. Reform certainly needed, and a lot of people saying, hey, this model seems to be broken. We might need to start again on this one. A big announcement, big meet the press occasion from various government ministers, but not a lot of change on the horizon.
Yes, I mean, we had some big changes to the electricity sector in the 1990s under a cabinet minister, Max Bradford. It involved bringing in lots more market policies, and essentially we had all the electricity companies operating as private companies, and the result has been just prices dramatically going up since 1990s. Each government that comes in sort of tinkers a bit, makes a few reforms, and the demand, I think, from the public has just reached a real height under this current government, and there's been some expectations that things finally have to change. And so the current government with the energy minister Simon Watts, great name by
Yeah,
the way for
yeah.
an energy minister, Simon Watts, he commissioned a report to be done on what can be done to fix this. And so we had an Australian consultancy come up with some pretty radical ideas.
hmm
And there's lots of radical ideas floating around because of just such big discontent about those high prices, and the fact that we're struggling, particularly with our renewables.
Yeah.
So when New Zealand has a dry winter, when the lakes, because we're very reliant on hydro power, and the lakes get too low to generate that, we then have to start up the coal-fired and gas-fired
Yeah.
generators, which isn't what you want in a climate change, sort of emergency.
Yep.
So there's a lot of discontent and change wanted. But then what Simon Watts announced this week was really a damp squib. It's got some okay reforms there,
Yep.
but none of them are what was expected to be a bit of a bigger bang. And so across the political spectrum, there's just been a lot of disappointment expressed since that announcement. All pretty much saying, is that it?
Yeah.
Is that all that is going to change? And so, yeah, I don't think the government's won over anyone on this.
hmm Can we just focus on, was
Apart
there
from the
anything?
apart from the companies themselves,
Well,
which I
exactly.
think
They're
will
doing
bring
very well, and possibly there was a bit of lobbying as well as an official
indeed.
report from Australians that may have influenced the government's decision at the end of the day. You did mention that there were some positive things there. Let's find those
Yeah.
nuggets. What are some of the positive changes proposed, Bryce?
Probably my favourite part of it is giving a bit more teeth to the electricity authority. So this is something I think the last government set up, and it has the ability to work on behalf of consumers, basically, to regulate and police the power companies. And this government's going to give them a bit more ability to do that job.
Yep.
So that's a good thing. We're seeing some not promises, but the government looks like they're going to put some of their own money up to help build some renewable generators. So that's good. I think that's necessary. They're going to coordinate perhaps the importation of gas.
Okay.
It's just a fact at the moment. New Zealand has to import gas from Australia, etc., and we need a bespoke terminal to do that. And
hmm
so the government is finally coming to the party on that. And there's a few more other more minor ones. None of them are particularly bad. I mean, they're maybe bad from a sort of critique of fossil fuels point of view, that they're sort of doubling down on using more coal, more gas. But apart from that, there's nothing particularly wrong with the reforms. It's just what they're missing.
Yeah.
They're missing kind of some of the big structural change. So the one policy that was suggested in the report that they commissioned and has been floating around a lot is to break up the big companies.
Yeah.
So in New Zealand, we've got what are commonly referred to as the gentailers, so the generators combined with the retailers. So your Mercury Energies, your Meridians, etc.,
hmm
Contact. They both are the companies that generate the power through the hydro dams, etc., and then they sell it to the customer, which
Yeah.
is quite unusual to have those things. Normally, they're separated out. You have one company for each. In New Zealand, we don't really have that, and it means that those companies just have a huge amount of power,
Yeah.
to excuse
Yeah.
the pun,
Yeah.
and it means that they can distort the market, and it means it's a seller's market, and it also, in my view at least, means they have a bit of leverage over the politicians. They
Yeah.
managed to kind of get their way in the beehive. So breaking it up was one idea that this government has decided not to do.
And when we say decided not to do, because I think this is an important point. Yes, it's great to commission a report from overseas and to get some of the experts in and to have some recommendations. But when those recommendations are ignored because people who are making a serious amount of money out of all of this have lobbyists which have the ear of our politicians, well, we've just wasted a lot of money on a report and not saved a lot of money in our electricity bills, it seems.
Oh, I concur with that absolutely. And it's not really clear how the government's come to these decisions. There's certainly a lot of public uh, interest in some of those more radical solutions,
Yep.
and it's not just a sort of public that doesn't know what they're talking about. This is experts, this is business
Hmm.
wanting that sort of structural change. You've had the Auckland Chamber of Commerce, Simon Bridges, a former cabinet minister for national, coming out really strongly wanting this radical change.
Yep.
You've got the CTU wanting radical change. So it is really unusual, and it's hard to explain this apart from this idea that the power companies themselves have lobbied to keep the status quo. And it was interesting that, after the government made their announcement, you had the energy companies congratulating them on, being brave for keeping the status quo, and the share price went up on those power companies
Wow.
straight away.
Yeah, and hey, the people who had shares made some money, and everybody who needed to buy electricity had less money. Oh, just wanting you to talk about some of the structural aspects of this. And look, I'm not an expert on this. This is a layman's understanding of it. But the actual model incentivizes scarcity. The
Yeah,
actual model says, like, if we have just about enough electricity, but maybe slightly less than we need, that will push the price of electricity up. So if the
yeah.
people that are making the profit are also the people that are deciding how much electricity should be made, everything incentivizes them not making enough electricity to keep their prices up. And meanwhile, us, the consumers, are caught in the crossfire of this. We can't change the outcome unless we address this fundamental problem in the structure of it.
Oh, look, you've just explained it all perfectly, and it is complicated, but that's the best way to sum it all up. They have a very complicated market way that the companies get paid for the electricity,
Mm.
and yes, it does incentivize the companies to keep from building more power companies. More power generators,
Yeah.
and that's one of the big problems, really, that over the last decade or two, these companies are making mega profits, and so they're giving billions of dollars in profit to their owners. Ironically, the owners for some of these companies are half the government.
Yeah.
So, the state owns, half of some of these big companies, and they get the profits. But they're not investing enough of their returns into creating new, especially in terms of wind and solar,
Yeah.
where the technology is really there at the moment to be able to produce lots of electricity. They're not investing in that, which is what they should be doing if they were following kind of what's in the public interest. But because of the distortions of the market, they want to keep their generation of electricity low. So, yeah, it really is a very dysfunctional situation.
When you've even got Shane Jones against the idea. I mean, this is Shane Jones who says, "Hey, let's dig up the West Coast. Who cares about the frogs? We need coal. Drill, baby, drill." All of these kind of statements we've heard from Shane Jones over the years.
Well,
He's a big
yeah,
fan of fossil fuels. He's not a fan of the current reforms as proposed.
look, This is coalition politics, and so it's quite odd. But he's the associate energy minister,
Yeah,
and he's come out essentially quite strongly against this announcement himself. And before the announcement, he was really pushing for renationalisation and a split up of these big companies. And he New Zealand First and still making those noises. And I think it's one that will grab. Yeah, it's a good vote winner actually,
yeah,
because and we're starting to see, I think New Zealand First uh, marking themselves out from national and act on some of these big issues.
hmm
We might see more of that. Actually, it was quite interesting because in the report, they talked about splitting up these companies, but they also talked about the possibility of privatizing, the rest of the shares that the government owns in these companies.
yeah,
So, um, and that would have been quite big and bold. And so the report was saying perhaps the government should sell their shares in Meridian, etc., and put that money into a new company. They were going to call it Newco,
hmm
and this company would create more generation. This
okay.
would invest in renewables. And again, that was quite a radical idea. And I think ACT would have quite liked that idea. But again, New Zealand First probably vetoed that. So essentially, you had different parts of the coalition vetoing the more radical left or right
Yeah.
sort of bold ideas, which meant you ended up with kind of a mushy middle response, which kind of suits no one at all.
The three-legged race, which is MMP politics here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I must say, it's maybe a bold idea, but it's a terrible name, New Co. But let's have a referendum on that. Hey, Bryce, appreciate your thoughts and comments, your analysis on this issue. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.